It's a great question. The reaction has been very open and very positive. In fact, we've already made some decisions to begin to realign some of our cost structures, some of our incentive programs to, again, realign it at the very least to be competitive in the New England market. To give an example, I sit on what is called the Governor's Unemployment Insurance Compensation Board, Advisory Board, and it's our job to advise the management of our unemployment insurance trust fund. And unfortunately, like our pension system, it's greatly undercapitalized. And again, ours is tied to the fact that we have so many people requiring unemployment benefits. And one of the things that we needed to do, which was painful to make up this significant, really unfunded liability that we have, we had to readjust both how we tax businesses, but equally difficult and painful is the benefits that we could offer those uninsured and their families. So in making that decision, we at the very least made both increase and reduction of benefits aligned with what existing New England communities, particularly Mass and Connecticut, pay out or pay into. That was very important to do, and there was a tremendously positive dialogue between labor and business and government that at the very least as we begin to realign these programs, we need to at least be competitive and aware of a New England marketplace from both a cost and certainly an investment standpoint. We're having that same discussion on corporate income taxes as far as where we'd like to be. And again, we're not worried about some of the zero and some of the low tax states because again, South Dakota has such a low rate because there's not a lot of infrastructure. There's not going on there. They used to say that about Rhode Island. We're densely compacted. We have a lot of infrastructure. Land values are high. Delivery of services and costs are higher here in New England as it would be in other market sectors. So we've understood that, but we now know that at the very least our corporate income tax needs to be aligned at least of what the expectations we would pay in Mass or Connecticut, because again, that's our competition. That's where the movement is. In fact, we've looked very carefully, and again, there's so many of these foundations that do comparative studies on tax competitiveness and cost competitiveness. One of the better ones, because they've been around a long time and they're consistent, is the Tax Foundation. Some have said they're a little bit business or conservative oriented, but most tax people are pretty conservative anyway. They're pretty, that's who they are. That's a part of their DNA for the most part. But this Tax Foundation study was interesting because it compared Rhode Island to the other 49 states in 5 areas of tax competitiveness: corporate, personal, sales, unemployment insurance tax, and my favorite, property tax. And what's interesting is that sales tax were fairly competitive. Our 7% rate is high, but unlike other big states, the Texas, Californias, New Yorks, they have tiered sales taxes, local, regional, county, such. Also, our base is not as broad in what we tax. So we're actually up in the top third. We're pretty competitive on the sales tax side. But again, one of the issues that's on the table is to raise revenue to deal with this budget deficit is to broaden taxable items, professional services, architects, lawyers, accountants, things such as that. So that is competitive. But the ones that are not competitive are property tax, where we're 50th, and unemployment insurance, where we're 48th and 49th. And the property tax issue, to be fair, is the fact is that our property tax, there's no scale. I mean, our cities and towns, for the most part, in our public school systems, are almost fully dependent upon the property tax. When you're in a small town, your entire general fund, your annual general fund budget, about 60–70% of that, even higher in some cases in a small rural town, is property tax funded for public education. So the challenge that we have is that it's the scale issue that we need to take control of the property tax. And that means shifting the cost of public education away from a property tax, which in reality, since at least the last 100 years, property is not an indicator of wealth. Maybe when you had a farm and you were growing things and had cattle, it was an indicator of wealth. But today, property is not a reliable indicator of wealth. In fact, most of us, at least I certainly am with 3 kids in college, what we're called is cash poor, land rich. I have a great plantation house in Newport that everyone thinks is worth a lot of money. But the reality is that it's not, because I'm using equity loans so I can pay for my kids' college, my vacation someday. And if I'm not selling it and moving to a low-cost market, it really doesn't have any value to me. So I am literally, like many of us are, we're literally cash poor and land rich. So the property tax should not be seen as a major indicator or a major use of proceeds, fund of anything, and certainly not education. But because of the way it is, and the fact that we have 39 cities and towns and 37 school districts, and we may not be achieving the efficiency and innovation and collaboration and scale that's required, the property tax is a very high burden. And most importantly, it's not efficiently raising the dollars that's needed to sustain public school and public infrastructure investment. So that's why we're 50th. So these are all critical things and data things. The one thing I didn't say, one of the challenges that we've had in economic development, at least in my career in the state, is very few economic development strategies, policies, tax credits have been data or strategy driven. They've just been created. And at the very least, what's happened is that if legislation comes forth for an economic development plan, what will tend to happen is that it's reviewed from a fiscal impact standpoint. I have an idea for a tax credit for an industry. And instead of looking at it from a standpoint of what's the long-term return on investment, what's the cost benefits of this? What jobs of wealth is created and sustained by this? And does it really create or sustain jobs of wealth? Or is that happening anyway? What does this credit do? That dialogue isn't going on. What's going on is simply, what's the cost of this credit? What's the cost to the existing or future year budgets? And if the number's 20 million, well, we can do it. It's a good economy. We can absorb 20 million. And if we have a bad economy, we eliminate it. And we eliminate it regardless if it's good, bad, or indifferent. So one of the things that we need to do is to have more strategy, data-driven economic planning and investment strategy, as other states have done. And one of the things we'll be doing in EDC, which I feel very passionate about, the staff knows I've talked about this as a board member, we're going to create a division on economic policy planning and data. We're going to hire an economist and a staff of people who can really help drive data and strategy-driven economic development, and collaborate with the General Assembly, work with our stakeholders in the public-private sector. The Poverty Institute is here, and they've said this consistently all along. Where's the data? Where's the justification? How are we making decisions on either investing or reducing government systems, and we don't know where the data is? And they're absolutely right. And that was the Poverty Institute telling the business community, whereas the business community should have recognized this and drove it from the very beginning. So having that data, having the understanding of the competitive and ever-changing competitive markets is something that we will value and something we will build an infrastructure around so that we make the right investment decisions with a few dollars that we're always going to have in any given budget year.